Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about the Syrian civil war,
Oh, right.
but specifically looking at it through the lens of Syrian Christians.
Right.
And we're going to be drawing all of our information today from this really great book called Syria Crucified: Stories of Modern Martyrdom in an Ancient Land.
Excellent book.
Yeah, have you had a chance to read it?
I have. Yeah. It's very powerful.
Yeah, really intense. And then I think what's so interesting about it is we often hear about the Syrian civil war in terms of, the kind of the political and military side of things.
Yeah.
But this book really brings us down to the personal level, the human level
Right.
of people who are experiencing it firsthand.
And to really kind of understand these stories and the weight that they carry, I think it's also important to understand just Syrian Christianity itself. It's not something new. This is a very ancient community going back centuries, predating Islam in the region.
Yeah.
And that really shapes how Syrian Christians view themselves within Syrian society, within the kind of milieu of the Middle East and their relationship with Islam as well.
Okay, so let's kind of rewind back to pre-war Syria.
Hmm.
Before the conflict broke out,
Okay.
the book introduces us to this young woman named Ruba, who grew up in Damascus.
Right.
And she kind of paints a picture of what life was like before the war.
Yeah, her description of her childhood in the Christian quarter of Damascus I thought was fascinating.
Yeah. What were some of the things that stood out to you about her account?
Well, I mean, she talks about, churches being at the center of the community.
Yeah.
She talks about being able to attend church services even during school hours,
Wow.
from the Christian schools. And she even talks about Muslims participating in Easter celebrations. So, you get this picture of this kind of interfaith harmony that, we often forget existed in Syria before the war.
And she also mentions this tradition of visiting all the churches in the Christian quarter on the Thursday before Easter,
Right.
which is really interesting. Kind of gives you a glimpse into this community that's deeply rooted in its faith and traditions.
Absolutely.
But then the book also introduces us to these two sisters, Maria and Farah,
Yes.
who grew up in Damascus but had a little bit of a different experience.
Yeah.
They were part of this Christian choir that was actively supported by the Assad regime.
Right.
And Farah even had some interactions with the Assad family personally.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's kind of a reminder that the Assad regime, which, often is portrayed in a very negative light,
Yeah.
also had this complex relationship with minority groups like Christians.
Absolutely. While it was authoritarian, undoubtedly,
Yeah.
it did provide a certain level of stability, especially for minority communities.
Right.
So, it's a more nuanced reality than we often get in the broader narrative.
Yeah, for sure. So then, of course, the war breaks out and everything changes.
Yeah.
Rabah, Maria, and Farah all share these really chilling accounts of how the atmosphere shifted as the conflict escalated.
Right. Security checkpoints becoming commonplace, the sounds of bombings and mortar attacks becoming part of daily life.
Maria and Farah even had this experience where a car bomb exploded near their school.
Right, right.
And it wasn't just random violence either. It seems that Christian areas and institutions were specifically targeted during the war.
Yes. The book recounts a number of instances of Christian schools being bombed, churches being attacked.
Right.
Shaza, who's Marie's mother, describes her office being bombed on multiple occasions,
Wow.
and even a terrifying encounter that she had with a sniper.
Oh, my gosh.
So, it paints a very disturbing picture of how this war directly and intentionally impacted the Christian community.
And then there was this added layer of the rise of extremism on top of all of that.
Right.
And Shaza talks about how she struggled to understand these strangers. She called them strangers who seemed to have no mercy. And she had worked with Iraqi refugees who had already fled similar violence.
Right.
And they had warned her about the fate that awaited Syrian Christians.
Mm.
But it's almost like she couldn't let herself believe it at the time.
It's a tragic reminder that sometimes the most dire warnings come from those who have already witnessed the unimaginable.
Yeah.
And those warnings became reality for Syrian Christians.
And the book also introduces us to this Syriac priest monk, Father Bashar.
Yes.
And he grew up in Mosul, Iraq.
That's right.
And then he also witnessed the war in Syria. So his perspective is really interesting.
It is, and he grew up in the Nineveh Plains,
Yeah.
which is a region with a very long and rich Christian history,
Yeah.
going back to the very early days of the church. And he witnessed the rise of Islamic extremism in Iraq firsthand,
Yeah.
culminating in that horrific attack on the Sayyidat al-Najat church in Baghdad,
Oh, gosh.
where over 50 worshippers were killed.
It's hard to even imagine something so horrific. And the book talks about how that attack really sent shockwaves through the Christian community
It did.
in Iraq and beyond. It was just this brutal wake-up call about the very real and growing threat of religious persecution.
And initially, the Christians in Father Bashar's community, they were in disbelief
Yeah.
that ISIS could even reach their areas.
Right.
They felt safe, they had their Christian enclaves. But of course, conflict has a way of shattering any illusion of safety.
Absolutely. And as the situation in Iraq became more dangerous, many Christians actually fled to Syria, seeing it as a safe haven.
Right.
Which is ironic, considering what would happen just a few years later.
Absolutely. And Father Bashar himself, he notes that Iraqi Christians viewed Syria as this place where they could freely practice their faith. And he even contrasts it with Iraq, where, just having your religion listed on your ID card could put you at risk.
Wow.
So you see this kind of difference in the level of religious freedom,
Yeah.
highlighting the complex dynamics within these two countries, right?
Right.
Both were ruled by authoritarian regimes.
Yeah.
But the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad presented itself as this protector of minorities,
Right.
including Christians.
Yeah, it's a very complicated picture.
It is.
And it seems that even in Syria, things weren't always ideal for Christians.
Right.
Father Bashar actually experienced some discrimination from some Muslims when he was at university in Mosul.
Yeah, he talks about some instances of Christian students being targeted and even killed.
Wow.
So, again, this underscores that while a level of tolerance existed, there were definitely tensions and prejudices that simmered beneath the surface.
Right.
And these complexities existed long before the civil war broke out.
Yeah. And then as the Syrian civil war begins, Father Bashar is actually in Damascus for his priestly ordination.
Right.
And what happens?
Yeah.
A bomb explodes near the church.
Right.
Sending everyone into a panic.
Yeah.
So even this sacred moment was interrupted by the violence of the war.
He mentions that it was the American visitors who were the most panicked by the bombing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's kind of a reminder of how people experience and perceive conflict differently.
Absolutely.
Based on their own backgrounds, their own sense of security.
Yeah, you have to wonder what that must have felt like for them.
Yeah, I mean, for those who'd never experienced war firsthand,
Right.
this sudden eruption of violence must have been a profound shock. But for Syrians, it was becoming a tragic part of daily life.
And Father Bashar would soon find himself in another dangerous situation at the Cherubim Monastery near Sidnaya.
Right.
Which came under siege by rebel forces.
Right. And you really get a sense of the chaos and the terror of the war from his firsthand account.
Yeah. What were some of the things that he described?
Well, he talks about the constant shelling, the fear of being overrun by the rebels, just the uncertainty of what the future holds.
It's frightening to think about.
It is.
But amidst all of this, the book describes this incredible story of resilience. The monks refused to abandon the monastery, even as the situation became increasingly dangerous.
Yeah, it speaks to their unwavering faith and their commitment to their spiritual home. Even in the face of danger.
And Father Bashar tells this incredible anecdote about the abbot of the monastery, Archimandrite John, actually meeting with the rebel fighters that were surrounding the monastery.
Yes.
It's hard to imagine having that kind of courage.
It is. And what's so fascinating about this encounter is that, the monks' fearlessness and their kindness seemed to have disarmed the rebels.
Yeah.
And it seemed to challenge their perceptions of Christians, showing them a different side of their supposed enemy.
It's a powerful reminder that even amidst conflict, human connection and compassion can still prevail. Yep. And then there's the story of the massive Christ statue that was built in Sidnaya during the siege.
Yes.
Imagine constructing this symbol of defiance and hope, even as the city is under siege.
It really speaks to the enduring strength of the Christian community.
It's quite a powerful image. And then the book introduces us to Moses, the Syrian Armenian from Aleppo. And his story adds another layer to our understanding of the war's impact.
Yes, he talks about feeling caught between two worlds as a Syrian Armenian,
Right.
almost like he's having an identity crisis. And then there's his family history.
Yeah.
His grandfather was a survivor of the Armenian genocide,
Wow.
you know? So this historical context is crucial for understanding the anxieties and the fears that many Syrian Armenians carried with them during the Civil War. They had already faced persecution
Yeah.
and displacement, and the potential for history to repeat itself must have been a constant worry.
Absolutely. And that fear became a reality for Moses because his brother was tragically killed in a bombing in 2012.
Yeah.
And it really must have forced him to confront the dangers of the war head on.
Oh.
And the book details Moses' escape from Aleppo with his family in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to navigate these dangerous checkpoints controlled by rebel forces.
Right.
And they were questioned about their religious identity
Yes.
and potential ties to the military. And it makes you realize how dangerous it must have been to be a young man of military age during the war.
Right. You never knew who to trust. It really captures the fear and the uncertainty that permeated daily life in Aleppo at that time.
Yeah,
You never knew who might pose a threat or what dangers might be lurking around the corner.
absolutely.
And particularly dangerous for young men who are of military age.
Right.
Because they could be targets for rebel groups looking for recruits or hostages. So
Right.
it really highlights that vulnerability of civilians, especially young men, in conflict zones.
Yeah. And then the book takes us to Idlib, where we meet Ibrahim,
Yes.
a Syrian Christian, who offers some insight into the rise of extremism in the region.
His story is particularly interesting because he grew up in Idlib, which was predominantly Sunni Muslim.
Right.
So his perspective really helps us to understand how that religious coexistence shifted as the war went on. And, he was very disillusioned with the Muslim Brotherhood,
Yeah.
seeing them as a threat to Syria's stability and security. He even recounts this conversation that he had with the Minister of Higher Education,
Oh, wow.
where he kind of challenged this idea of Syria ever having a Christian president.
That's a bold move
It is.
to challenge the minister like that.
Right. It kind of reveals those underlying tensions and
Yeah.
prejudices that existed even within this supposedly secular Ba'athist government.
Right.
The idea of a Christian leader was inconceivable to many in power.
Wow. And Ibrahim's perspective was also shaped by his experience with sectarian violence.
Yeah.
He talks about the Hama massacre of 1982,
Right.
which was this brutal crackdown by the Assad regime against a Muslim Brotherhood uprising
Yes.
that left thousands dead.
A very dark chapter in Syrian history.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it really, even though it happened decades before the Civil War, it casts this long shadow
Right.
over Syrian society.
Right.
And highlights those deep-seated divisions and the potential for violence that always existed beneath the surface.
And then tragically, Ibrahim's city of Idlib fell to Jabhat al-Nusra,
Right,
which is this extremist group with ties to al-Qaeda.
right.
And this takeover forced many Christians to flee for their lives.
Yeah, it's a tragic example of how the war really empowered these extremist groups.
Yeah.
They were able to seize control of territory and impose their own brutal ideology.
And it was during this takeover that Ibrahim's cousin, Father Ibrahim,
Yeah.
a priest in Idlib,
Right.
was kidnapped by Jabhat al-Nusra.
Yeah.
And his story adds this whole other layer of horror to our understanding of the war's impact on Christians.
Yeah, the kidnapping of Father Ibrahim, it reminds us of the dangers faced by religious leaders
Yeah.
in these conflict zones.
Right.
They often become targets for extremist groups,
Right.
Seen as symbols of a faith that must be silenced.
And Father Ibrahim's account of his captivity is truly harrowing.
It is.
He talks about being held in inhumane conditions, facing constant threats, psychological torture. He even tells this story about a father and son being executed in front of him
Yes.
by the militants.
It's a chilling reminder of the brutality and the depravity of these extremist groups.
Yeah.
Their actions weren't just about political goals.
Right.
They were fueled by this deep-seated hatred
Right.
and this desire to inflict suffering.
And yet, despite all of the horrors that he endured, Father Ibrahim never lost his faith.
Right.
He describes finding strength in prayer,
Yeah.
believing that God would protect him and see him through this ordeal.
It's a remarkable testament to the sustaining power of faith in the face of such adversity.
Yeah. What do you think helped him maintain his faith in that situation?
Well, even in the darkest of moments, he found solace and hope in his belief in God.
Yeah. You have to admire his courage and his ability to hold on to hope in that situation.
Absolutely. And what's even more remarkable is that Father Ibrahim eventually managed to escape captivity.
Wow.
It's a truly incredible story of survival and resilience.
It really is. It's amazing. And once he was free, he didn't hesitate to speak out about what happened to him and to the Christian community in Idlib.
Yeah, it takes an immense courage to do that, especially considering the risks involved.
Yeah.
His testimony, along with the accounts of others in this book, it really helps to shed light on the complexities of the Syrian civil war.
Right.
Challenging those simplified narratives that we often see in the media.
It definitely makes you realize how important it is to hear those diverse voices and to understand that there are always multiple perspectives in any conflict.
Absolutely.
The book also tells the story of Shafik, another Syrian Christian from Idlib.
Right.
And he had a very strong reaction to John McCain's visit to the region in 2013.
Yes, McCain met with rebel leaders in Idlib, including some from Jabhat al-Nusra.
Right.
And Shafiq was outraged by this.
Yeah.
This was the same group that had kidnapped his cousin, Father Ibrahim.
Right.
And to him, it felt like the U.S. was turning a blind eye to the atrocities being committed against Christians by these extremist groups.
It must have been incredibly frustrating for him
it was.
to see, a prominent U.S. figure meeting with those responsible for so much suffering in his community.
And it highlights that disconnect that can exist between international politics and the lived experiences of those on the ground.
Absolutely. We often talk about the fog of war.
Right.
But it seems like that fog extends beyond the battlefield.
Right.
And can really cloud our understanding of these conflicts even from afar.
Absolutely.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about the aftermath of the war.
Okay.
And specifically the efforts to rebuild and provide aid to those who have suffered.
Right.
The book's afterward focuses on the Syrian Orthodox Church's humanitarian work. And it mentions this archimandrite, Alexei Jihada, who oversees these relief efforts.
He does.
What can you tell us about him?
Well, he describes their work as not just helping Christians, but also Muslims who are suffering.
Okay.
It's a really crucial point because it shows that their mission goes beyond religious boundaries.
Yeah.
They see themselves as serving anyone in need, regardless of their faith.
That's really inspiring to hear. And it also speaks volumes about the resilience of the Syrian people as a whole.
Yes.
They're rebuilding their lives and communities amidst the ruins of war. It's really a testament to the human spirit and our ability to find hope, even in the darkest of times.
And the book also emphasizes that the Syrian Christian community is determined to stay in their homeland.
Right.
They see themselves as a vital part of Syria's history and culture, and they refuse to be driven out.
It speaks to their deep-rooted connection to their land and their faith.
It does.
It's a powerful statement of resilience and determination.
It is.
Their stories are incredibly moving, and they really challenge us to think about the human cost of war.
Yeah.
And how we can respond to such suffering with compassion and a desire for understanding.
Absolutely.
One of the things that has struck me the most throughout this deep dive is the incredible resilience of the Syrian Christian community.
Yes.
Despite facing persecution, displacement, and unimaginable loss.
Right.
They have clung to their faith, their traditions,
Right.
and their determination to rebuild their lives.
I agree. Their stories are incredibly powerful. It's easy to get caught up in the political military narratives of war.
Right.
But these accounts really remind us of the individuals whose lives are shattered by conflict.
Absolutely. And they remind us of the enduring strength of the human spirit.
Right.
Even in the darkest of moments, there's hope.
Right.
There's faith.
Yeah.
And there's the will to carry on.
Absolutely.
This deep dive has been a heavy but incredibly important journey. It's a stark reminder that war doesn't just impact nations.
Right.
It profoundly impacts individuals, families, and communities.
Absolutely. And it's vital that we continue to seek out these diverse perspectives, these personal stories, to gain a more nuanced understanding of the human cost of conflict.
I couldn't agree more. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to just take a moment to reflect on the human cost of war.
Yes.
Not just in Syria, but in all corners of the world.
You're right, and I think the key takeaway from this exploration of Syria Crucified is that even amidst unimaginable suffering, the human spirit can endure. The resilience, the faith, and the hope demonstrated by the Syrian Christian community are truly inspiring.
Yeah, it really is. And to see how people can find that inner strength, that determination to rebuild and carry on.
It's incredible.
It's a real testament to the power of faith.
Yeah.
And the human spirit to endure even the darkest of times.
I completely agree. It's a humbling reminder for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
That even in the face of such adversity,
Yeah,
there's still hope. There's still a belief in a better future.
absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Syria Crucified,
Right.
what what stands out to you as the most important takeaway for our listener?
Well, I think it's crucial to remember that we've only just scratched the surface here
Right.
of a very complex and multi-layered conflict.
Yeah.
Um, these stories, while incredibly powerful, represent just a handful of experiences
Mm.
from a much larger community.
Right.
And there are countless other stories out there waiting to be heard.
You're so right.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we should never settle for those simplistic narratives,
Right.
especially when it comes to something as multifaceted as the Syrian civil war.
Absolutely.
We should always strive to understand the nuances, the different perspectives,
Yeah.
and the human stories that lie at the heart of these conflicts.
Exactly. And I think this deep dive has really highlighted the importance of seeking out those diverse voices,
Mm.
of challenging our own assumptions,
Right.
and of engaging with the world around us with a greater sense of empathy and understanding.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay.
So to our listener, as you continue to learn and explore,
Yeah.
remember the stories that we've shared today.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the resilience of the Syrian Christian community,
Yes.
their unwavering faith,
Absolutely.
and their determination to rebuild their lives,
Yeah.
and let their experiences inspire you to seek out deeper understanding, to
Mhm.
challenge those simplistic narratives,
Mm.
and to approach the world with a greater sense of compassion.
And never underestimate the power of individual stories to shed light on even the most complex of global events.
Well said.
Keep asking questions.
Yeah.
Keep learning.
Mm-hmm.
And keep engaging with the world around you.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring.